All right, we have that next panel come on up. I'm going to turn the podium over to Southeast Conference's Deputy Director, where I saw Dan. Where's Dan? There he is. There he is. He's right in the bright lights there. I could look in the peripherals. So, all right. Well, the exciting thing is that a lot of the project that Southeast Conference is working on, the research and development side of things, workforce development side, but the market piece is one that's really intriguing. So I'm looking forward to this panel, and I'm going to let Dan just take it from here.
Good morning, everybody. Still waking up, huh? But thank you, Kao, so much for that great kickoff. Wah, get us going. The purpose of this panel is to elevate the marketing discussions within mariculture, because obviously they should. I think it's quite clear, especially on the kelp side, but I would say also on the oyster side, as we see different businesses grow and try to scale, we want to keep developing markets so that everybody can succeed and continue to grow as much as they want. So we are investing heavily in market development, research, and then eventually into programming, similar to what ASME does for seafood. We want to eventually be doing that for mariculture and a collective marketing of our industry. And the first piece of that, we brought on a contractor last summer, Food for Climate League. And we love their work, their savviness, their experience with both oysters, shellfish, and seaweed, and their ambition to do more than you can probably reasonably think you could do with marketing some of these products. There's a long-term vision to solve climate issues, to inspire people to incorporate healthier food into their diet, and we love that combination with what we can do to support our farmers and support our industry. And so I just thank all the panelists here, and I'll turn it over to Sophie to talk about their work and her previous work and whatever else.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much just for the opportunity to be here. It's a huge honor for us at Food for Climate League to be in this gorgeous place with all of you, but also in community with so many people who share this vision to grow Alaska mariculture. So I am the Director of Strategy for Food for Climate League, and in that role, I lead a lot of kind of systems thinking for impact. I lead trainings on how to talk about food and climate. I lead initiatives with city leaders all over the world, work with some of the largest food companies in the world and in the US. And also a lot of the time, I'm helping to translate the science into actionable strategies. My background is really in behavior change and systems change. And you'll see that that's what we do at Food for Climate League, is try to change perceptions, behaviors, and systems. And I wear a lot of other hats too, and I'm the proud mother of twin boys, identical twins, age 5, who are kelp pickle fanatics. And I thank you, Jen Brown, for that. But it's funny, in our house we get, every so often my sons will say, when I grow up, I want to be a scientist like Dada. Or when I grow up, I want to be a paramedic to help people. And I'm like, that's great, sweetie. Why not be a food systems change maker like Mama? And they give me this blank stare like, that is what exactly? So my goal in the next 13 minutes is twofold. First is to really help you all see just how excited you can be about shifting perceptions, the power of perception, and to see the role that we can play, the open source tools and tools that you can gain to advance your own efforts. But my second goal is to explain what it is that I do to my kids by taking a selfie from here, because a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so that'll help them understand what it is that I came here to do. So if you guys can just bear with me, right? Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, great. So that part was easy. We knocked that out. Now, to shift into what I'm actually here to talk about, we, at Food for Climate League, we're really trying to make climate-smart food choices the norm. So I'll unpack that a little bit. Climate smart food choices really is this diverse menu of ways to eat sustainably. So it's regenerative agriculture, including regenerative farming, as we heard. It's biodiversity, local and regional sourcing. It's plant forward and plant-based. And so often what we see is that this remains niche instead of the norm. I want to let you just sort of sit with this slide for a moment. Food is the single strongest lever to optimize human health and environmental sustainability on Earth. Wow, I mean, period, full stop. That's such an extraordinary call to action for us as an organization, but it's also a new narrative because what we've seen for a long time, I've been in this space for a long, long time, working generally in change management, in systems change, as I mentioned, stakeholder engagement, is that so often this is framed in the negative. It's about the problems of the food system. The narrative, the food system is broken, has been repeated how many times? And I'm not saying it's not true. It's just that it's paralyzing for most people. It doesn't invite them in to be part of the solution. It's also really overwhelming for food companies, for producers, because it's not terribly fun to have that mirror held up and be kind of having a finger pointed at you like you are this problem, right? So instead, what we're really trying to do is shift perceptions, which are a key barrier to this whole diverse menu of ways to eat sustainably really becoming the norm. And you'll see that for us, a lot of it is also kind of identifying the fact that so often these foods are only seen as for white, Western, wealthy audiences, the kind of Whole Foods market, natural, organic brands and so forth, instead of mainstream for everyone. So we have an opportunity to change that by changing the perceptions. And we work really on norms in the role that kind of what my neighbor eats, what my friends and family eat. Those are huge drivers of whether of the food choices that each of us make individually. And we can do that by changing narratives and really leveraging behavioral sciences, so choice architecture, how choices are even presented, and the words, but also, and you're gonna hear from my colleague Chhavi, who is really phenomenal at this, the visuals. I mentioned a photo is worth 1,000 words, and it's not only how we talk about food and climate or how we position sustainable foods through words, but through icons, imagery, colors, and more. Our team has a lot of different expertise in social sciences, choice architecture, systems change. My colleague Evie and I have written lots of books, and we feed those insights into our work as well. But it was great to hear earlier, these opportunities are massive, and no one organization can achieve them on their own. So we really lean on collaboration, cultivating these ecosystems in everything that we do, and the power of partnership, while working with really phenomenal funders and companies. So I often think about the work that we do as kind of the last mile problem, if you're familiar with that in transportation. So often there might be a sustainable food product or a menu item, and a company will put it out there, or it could be a campaign, right? Food waste is another big area. And they'll say, well, we did all this R&D, and we nailed the supply chain, and we got organic certification, and so on and so forth, and then no one bought it. And they interpret that feedback loop as, I guess people don't care about sustainability. And it's a slightly different interpretation that we have, which is that people care about the climate. They just don't care about it as much as they care about other things. Meaning on a daily basis, the core human needs that pretty much all humans are just trying to kind of have spoken to are control, community, and purpose. And historically, the messages have only spoken to purpose. Go zero waste because the planet is counting on you. Eat less meat because you're a good person. These are altruistic, kind of give something up for the greater good. And those speak to some people some of the time, but they don't speak to everyone all of the time. And by kind of expanding the aperture to speak to things around control, for example, control over my own health, my finances, just putting food on the table for my family, getting through the day, those things just tend to be tend to open up that wider population to really feel like, yeah, those foods are for me. And also in terms of prioritization, in the US, very, very consistently, the top drivers of food choices are taste, cost, and health. always the same at number one. Convenience is table stakes in the US. It is assumed it will be convenient. It's not even listed by eaters as a need. Lower down are factors like animal welfare, social justice, and the planet. And so it's what we're really excited to do is kind of lead people to that sustainability story once you've hooked them with a story, with a sort of front door that speaks to those kind of higher priority issues and those other needs. So these are our different programs, and we have a lot of work on aquatic foods in particular that Dan mentioned was why we were kind of particularly excited to work with all of you on growing the market for Alaska mariculture. So some of you probably know this, and it's this really interesting mix of people have been at it for a long time, it's not new, and yet there's something really exciting about this moment in time. So for the first time at COP28, right, the Global Climate Summit in December, sustainable aquatic blue foods was mentioned in this, in the multilateral declaration. That is a very big deal. Food systems in general have often not been on the radar, on the agenda in climate. And this translates to that other key barrier we see, which is that a lot of times people just don't connect the dots between food and climate. It's much more common that people know about, oh, I can make a difference by my energy choices or my transportation choices. A lot of folks just don't think about food as a solution, as a way to take action. And this has been the case because a lot of policymakers aren't really talking about it either. And so this was a huge deal. The Blue Food Assessment globally was also a really incredible kind of call to action for us because it pointed to and also kind of tried to create a new narrative around, hey, we can actually feed a growing global population by increasing consumption, increasing markets for specific types of sustainable aquatic foods. And in particular, if you look at their kind of deep analysis for optimizing human health and nutrient density and diet quality, supporting equitable livelihoods, especially a lot of women-led productions all around the world, and for all the major environmental dimensions, bivalves, sea vegetables, and small pelagics are the three categories that rise to the top. Small pelagics, small oily fish, that's a topic for another day, but that was amazing kind of evidence-based confirmation that these are like really the areas to focus on, and so exciting that that's the focus of the work here. And then as mentioned, by Kehlani and others, this is not new, right? Indigenous communities around the world have been sustainably harvesting and farming coastal environments for thousands of years. But there's a really nice way to kind of marry this heritage and history with some of the interesting innovation and product development. Things like kelp burgers. I remember the first time I got a kelp burger sent to me in my freezer, and it just rocked my world, right? So it's the Chex Mix is another great visual of kind of bringing those two together. So we've been at this for a few years, as Dan mentioned. 2022, we released open source toolkits, eataquaticfoods.org, that are really communication guides for anyone who is already trying to promote these options. We're not really here to convince you to promote bivalves and sea vegetables. We're just here to help you promote them more effectively so that they are even more likely to drive selection and consumption in food service and CPG channels. We started the work in 2023 with Southeast Conference, and we're really testing different narratives in real food service operations while also leveraging the power of chefs who are phenomenal trusted voices for consumers, really helps kind of elevate the status of some of these foods and also make sure that they're prepared deliciously. Because if the food doesn't taste good, no one's going to eat it, and it won't matter how healthy and sustainable it is. And then we're really excited about the next phase of kind of consumer segmentation. And not only are all of you excited about these areas, but in addition to those global efforts I mentioned, it's been phenomenal to see this taking off throughout the US. There's Coalition for Sustainable Aquaculture that's creating the kind of regulatory framework for domestic aquaculture. There's a new series, if you don't know, called Hope in the Water, a major PBS documentary series coming out in June by Fed by Blue. And then it's just really exciting too, I was at Aspen Ideas Climate Festival last year, and this roundtable Sustainable Southeast Conference was there as well. Got to be with Marina Anderson and some others, but really kind of saying how investors can shape a really thriving aquaculture future in America. So with all that kind of wind at our backs, we see great applications of our insights to the work specifically in Alaska, and some of this will be very uniquely Alaska, but some of it is because your audience is lower 48, Americans, some of it will be more broadly applicable. So the other thing that we really looked at is kind of what has worked elsewhere to grow completely new product categories, things that people are not as familiar with in the context of kelp, or really just to kind of leverage that regional identity. Maine, I know there's a lot of good synergies between the work here and in Maine, but Maine is a phenomenal case study of market growth, really emphasizing the nutrient angle, which we know, again, health is truly a key driver. Tons of partnerships, and I know I saw Atlantic Sea Farms is here and others. So really, examples like that. I also understand there's sort of mixed feelings about this particular example, but the bottom line is they've also really grown the market for wild Alaska pollock and have a lot for us to look at, especially the kid angle, right? We heard that yesterday during the opening remarks. Starting with young people, going to K-12 schools is a really exciting strategy, and also partnering, again, kind of differentiating strategies for food service and CPG. While at the same time also, again, kind of really emphasizing the nutrition benefits. And then lastly, in a lot of our work, which we just completed, and my colleague Chhavi will speak more about, we really tried to see what's sort of the playbook of strategies out there. And you look around the world, Italy is a great example, right? Region of origin brands, how widely recognizable that symbol of the Italian protected designation of origin is. Another big area is gastrotourism. This is one that I think is particularly exciting in the context of Alaska because it's not news to anyone. You all get a lot of tourists. And the cruise ship industry is obviously massive. But from a behavioral science perspective, this one excites me personally the most because when you go on a vacation, it's a time of disruption and it's a prime moment for formation of a new food habit. So the literature is very clear that in our daily lives, when we're just kind of going about, our usual routines, people are very head down eating the same things over and over and over. There's great stats on, family meal planning, and most families have like 8 to 12 dishes that they just cycle through every week. So you're not there to sort of kind of try as many new foods for a lot of folks. But when you have a time of disruption in your life, starting a job, moving to a new city, going to college, getting married, having a baby, etc., including going on vacation, it's actually you're totally open to new food habits, and it's that phenomenal sensory experience, that taste memory that can carry back with eaters after their trip to Alaska. So that one really excites me. Chefs and manifestos, kind of guiding North Stars globally. There's one, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, Chef's Manifesto, which again kind of unites people around common principles. And then, of course, community-based approaches, which are happening so beautifully here with cooperatives. We saw that again in Keolani's remarks as well, and really these phenomenal kind of hyper-local opportunities. So these are some of the strategies and insights that we're bringing forward to our work to kind of inform future marketing campaigns. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Chhavi. I think I'll just pass it to Chhavi to kind of tell you more about the narratives that we've done so far. Thank you so much.
Sophie. This works? Okay. That was so great. I feel inspired and glad to be collaborating with you. Hi, everyone. I'm Chhavi. I'm the Director of Research and Innovation at FCL, Food for Climate League. And before we get into my slides, I just want to share a little bit about my experience, the first experience in Alaska. I was born and raised in India, and I've never been this far west. And the first thing that I started once I landed here, my husband is Italian. We're both, you can imagine how big foodies we are. So we started looking at what are the best restaurants around. And we were trying some of those delicious food. But we noticed a pattern on the menus, some obvious and some less obvious patterns. So there were 3 things that were repeating constantly on menus, right? The first one, not surprising, salmon. Salmon in every shape and form, glazed, grilled, very delicious. But that made me really think about the power of the food identity, right? Like in any part of the world, if you close your eyes, think about Alaskan food, salmon is probably one of the first images that will pop in your mind. And so that's a really great job well done of a local food identity. The second one was a bit surprising. Does anyone want to guess? Avocado. I'm like, okay, what does minus 20 have to do with avocado? But that is the power of food trends. 10 years ago, avocado was the most popular ingredient in the United States. Our founder, Eve Taropol, wrote an entire book about the avocado toast generation, it's called Hungry. Food trends can really revolutionize how our menus look and what kind of food we eat, what kind of foods become part of our traditional diets. Well, the third one was burritos. That's what I'm still trying to figure out. But I guess a potential explanation is that good food doesn't have any borders. So I want to talk about why oysters were not that common, why kelp was not that common on these menus. It does confirm that we have our work cut out for us, but some of the barriers that we found in our research, I'll jump to that directly, is that first, many people just don't know what kelp is. What kelp is, what sea vegetable is, outside of certain contexts, which I'll speak to about. It's not extremely accessible. Like, you can't find many kelp-based products in the supermarkets. You can't find it on menus. And if it is available, it's not very affordable. The taste and texture, we all know, we're still trying to figure out with R&D how to get kelp to be delicious. There are health and safety concerns, but at the same time, there are some value propositions that we can really leverage and bank upon, right? The fact that it's extremely versatile. Like, today we were speaking about kelp being a sodium alternative, or we were talking about kelp in salads, or we were talking about kelp in burgers. So there's a lot of things that you can do with it. We also know that there are certain traditional foodways that we really hope to unearth and bring that can be relevant in our modern diets as well. Okay, wait. How do I go back? Yeah. How is kelp seen as of today is the prevailing narrative is around nutrition, health. Spirulina trend really brought sea vegetables to that very niche, people looking for supplements, health supplements market. We also know that it's associated with mission-oriented language like sustainability, equitable livelihoods. We know that it is highly, highly associated with Asian cuisine. So these are some of the narratives that we have as of today, globally and largely American. This is all American data. So what are some of the trends that we can leverage? Can we ride on the Asian cuisine wave, or should we be looking more at health and nutrition as a perspective? So those are some of the questions that we will be grappling with in the next phases of our research. Same thing for oysters. Why are oysters, even if they're very familiar, much more familiar than kelp, let's say, they also have some food safety and contaminants related concerns. Not everyone feels comfortable. Some people might be allergic. But at the same time, oysters are really seen as this raw luxury treat that is not for every day. And which is good in one way because people are willing to pay premium prices, but that also means that they remain in these very special moments, they are not part of our everyday meals. In terms of value propositions, how people have been really playing up flavors is really connecting it to the terroir, or where the oysters come from, and how the waters really make them very unique in terms of fattiness or brininess and other sensorial properties. We also leverage a lot of the grower stories. Like, you would mostly see on oyster product websites, there will be a lot of documentation of where this has been cultivated. There are people who love the unique texture, and I think there's so much opportunity there to play up and turn it into different kinds of textures. And there are some wild ideas going on in our team right now, like oyster ham. I don't know what do you think about that. We'll see where we go. Finally, just some of the narratives that we see, other than our luxury treat, is that it has certain ecological benefits. It can be seen as a superfood. Our partner Food and Planet really swears by it, who's a specialist in nutrition sciences. And we wanna also see oysters expand beyond just the raw format, right? And you can see it in po' boys, you can see it in sandwiches. There is opportunity there. So I think that's about it for my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chhavi. Thank you, Sophie. Thank you for traveling all the way from Italy to be with us, and I'm glad you're getting to be here during that dead rod and taste all the tastes. Oysters were delicious last night. Thanks also to everyone who brought those. Yeah. Well, with all these with the need to figure out what our value is and then create enough value to cover our costs and a little bit of profit, we need a lot of experimentation. And looking forward to Jen's talk about the experimentation that they've done and what they've learned over the years. And I don't have my title here for you, but Jen, I'll turn it over to you to navigate the waves of success with this.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Dan. Hi, everybody. My name is Jennifer Brown. I am the founder of a Ketchikan-based company called Foraged and Found, and we make CPG value-added food products out of Alaskan-grown kelp. My professional background is in marketing for global companies like Google and Microsoft, and I currently still offer marketing consulting services for small and medium-sized businesses and nonprofits, including Food for Climate League. We work together on some of the research that Sophie and Chhavi presented. But I'm here today wearing my Foraged and Found hat, which is an experience that has had some wins for us, which includes adding Whole Foods as a retail partner for some of our product lines, and also a lot of learning experiences. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the product development process, what that looks like, and a couple of unique nuances that introducing kelp as an ingredient can introduce to that process. So here's a quick overview of the product development process. There's probably an hour I could talk about for every single thing that you see on this slide, but since I only have a couple of minutes, I'm only going to touch on a couple of key points here. The first and most important one is that the more research that you do up front before you start developing a product, the more time, effort, and money you'll save on the back end. We know that from experience. And the product development process, I think, in a lot of cases has sometimes been kelp first, consumer second, saying, I have this material, what can I make with it? And I really think that we should be kind of flipping that whole experience around and saying, what's going to be the easiest lift to get a consumer to try a kelp-included product? And what can I do to create a product that looks like that? I'm going to dive in a little bit more deeply into the product development process itself. So let's say you've done all of your background research, you know about food trends, you know about your competitive set, you know what's going on in the industry, you have a product idea. Great, you're finished, right? No, you're not even getting started. There's a whole host of things that need to be figured out, and I would suggest getting the answers to as many of these questions as possible before you even start prototyping your first product. Understanding how the product's going to be made, how much it's going to cost you, where you're going to sell it, how much it's going to cost you to sell it there, how you're going to promote the product. There's lots and lots of questions that need to be answered before you spend $1 starting to develop a recipe. I could talk much longer about this, but I'm going to skip over to talking more specifically about what makes kelp unique. So on the product development side, the sensory attributes are really important, as Chhavi mentioned in her speech. You know, what do we need to make kelp taste like, right? But that's not where it ends either. There's also other sensory involvement from other senses when you're eating a food product. If you make a really great sauce or salsa, does it smell like the ocean? Does it smell fishy? Is that going to be off-putting to a consumer who's used to tomato-smelling salsa? Texture and mouthfeel is another important thing to think about. Are you making a product that needs a crunch, or should it have less crunch? Is it slimy? Is that texture of the kelp coming through too much in your product? All things to be thinking about as you're putting a product together. Availability of the kelp and the format of the kelp is another important thing to think about as well. You know, for most other materials in the food supply chain, there are established supply chains in multiple formats for those ingredients. With kelp, it's relatively new. So do you have a supply chain for your kelp? And if you do, can you get the volume that you need and the format that you need to develop your product at the scale you need to make it? Another thing to think about are certificates of analysis. So if you're producing your product at a co-packer, there might be certain microbes that they require are tested before the material can come into their facility. So making sure that you're testing for salmonella and E. coli and a couple of other things is also going to be an important thing to consider. On the channel side of things, there's 3 core things that I look at when I'm looking at product development. The first one is the size of the category in the channel that I want to deploy in. And in Foraged and Found, we mostly focus on grocery retail, but this would apply to food service or any other channel that you're looking at. The size of the category is important. It lets you know how big an opportunity you have to sell your product. The average price point is important to know because once you've figured out how much it costs to develop your product, you need to make sure that you're going to have enough margin to be able to for the product to earn its keep. And then the velocity of that particular product in that category, which is the frequency at which it passes through the store. So if someone buys a certain product only once a month versus once a week, that's going to tell you a lot about your sales projections. It's a really important number to know. When it comes to kelp products, we have to recognize that we're kind of asking a consumer to take a risk at this point. It's still relatively early in the game, and so we have to make it as easy as possible to say, hey, try this kelp-included product. It's going to be great. We'll give you a discount, or maybe we won't expect you to buy it quite as frequently. I can tell you from firsthand experience that in the categories that we sell our products in, our velocity is usually anywhere from 40 to 50% lower than the average velocity in that category. Super important to think about that and know that when you're doing financial projections for your business. And last but not least, how are you going to be promoting the product once you get it there? Getting it onto a grocery store shelf is not the finish line. It's usually the starting line. Every grocery store will expect you to spend a certain amount of money promoting your product. At Foraged and Found, we found a lot of success with a combination of limited time discount offers and demo sampling. Allowing people to try your kelp-included product is probably the easiest way to take that risk away from them and help it make them a lot easier for them to add it into their grocery cart. I think that's all I have for today, but if anyone's interested in developing value-added products, if you want to know more about the process, I'm happy to talk with you about it. Just come find me after the conference. Thanks.
Thank you, Jen. Appreciate you sharing your secrets with us. And when we think about marketing, we might think about logos and stuff like that. I also really am glad we have Evie here to talk about organic certification, just as an example of the type of work that needs to be done to build trust. It could look a bunch of different ways. It could be working with farmers to get certified, or it could be seaweed tissue analysis testing, which we are funding $800,000 in, led by AFDF. It's going to look a lot of different ways for different markets, wholesale versus consumers, and this is the type of work that we want to see people thinking about, and we do have funds to support, so we welcome ideas for folks to bring forward. And with that, I'll turn it over to Evie to talk about organic certification of farmed kelp and Alaska Needs Assessment and National Review of Alignment Certification Protocols and Guidelines. Wow.
Yeah. It's a mouthful. Thank you, Dan. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Again, I'm Evie Witten. I am principal of Regeneration North, which is we are a small Alaska-based consultancy working sort of at the intersection of natural climate solutions and community and food system resilience. And which again translates these days into a fair amount of work in the kelp space. I am also a kelp farmer in Kachemak Bay. Wearing my day job hat with Regeneration North, one of the projects that we started to work on last year under contract to the USDA Transition to Organic Partnership, which is a national program that is promoting a transition to organic production of all sorts of farmed products. They came to us curious if there was sufficient market demand to merit organic certification of kelp farms in Alaska. And this was spurred in part by some initial certification of farms both in Alaska and Maine. And so the initial project was to essentially do a needs assessment here in Alaska. Is there sufficient market demand? Are farmers interested in becoming certified organic in their production? And so that project then morphed into a second project, but I'm going to cover the Alaska needs assessment first. So the objectives of this project were to determine if there's sufficient market demand, to identify any barriers or impediments for farmers to become certified organic, and then to identify specific programs or mechanisms to support organic certification if there was sufficient market demand and farmer demand. In terms of the timeline, this project started in August and is going to run through June of 2024, June of this year. I want to acknowledge that I've already spoken one-on-one with a lot of you in the room about this project, but if you are a kelp farmer or processor or other who would like to talk about this, I want to sort of put it out there that it's designed to, we're really looking for your input and your feedback. So before I jump in and tell you the preliminary results, I want to emphasize that it's preliminary, and I would love to hear people's feedback and opinions about all of this. So what we've been finding so far in mostly one-on-one interviews and a certain amount of market research is, first of all, there's, not surprisingly, virtually zero data on markets for organic certified kelp. It's just too new. But that we do know, as many of you I'm sure have read the McKinley report, marketing report, that they describe the ideal kelp consumer as looking an awful lot like the kind of classic definition of research on the ideal organic consumer. So we know that there's probably some overlap there in terms of a demographic of who's buying kelp and who's buying organic products. The general, again, preliminary results, the general sense that we're getting is that they're, especially marketing outside of Alaska, that there is a certain amount, a certain large amount of demand projected for kelp to be certified organic. And that's both in food markets and in plant biostimulant markets, because the people who are buying those biostimulants are then getting their crops certified organic, and in animal supplements, again, because many of the people investing in methane-reducing ruminant supplements containing kelp are also in that organic production market. So there are some signals that there's some demand. In looking at what are the barriers for farmers to become certified, of course, the first one is cost, and a general lack of confidence in all markets. So, this is what we've been talking about for the last several days, right? That we have a lot of uncertainty around selling our kelp, and so that translates as, as a farmer, am I going to spend money and time to become certified if I'm not sure I've got a market? So a significant number of seaweed farmers in Alaska have already or are in the process of becoming certified, is another finding. And in that process and talking to those farmers, one of the things that we found pretty quickly was that, wow, the national organic standards around certifying a crop as organic don't apply very well to a kelp farm. They're really built for soil-based farms. And because this process is so new in the US, we found that there's a real need to work with the certifying entities, the organizations that certify farms as organic need to learn about what it means to be farming kelp in an ocean environment. So that led to the second project that emerged out of this Alaska Needs Assessment, which is a national scale project to look at how certifying entities are currently working with kelp farms and make sure that we're building a really strong foundation, and that as we interpret national organic standards that are built for a soil-based system, that we're interpreting them in a way that really makes sense for the kelp industry across the country. And so that process is in the early stages, and it's a collaborative cross-sector process where we are assembling all of the certifying bodies currently working in the kelp realm and bringing them into a working group to develop a common set of standards. And To make sure that it makes sense for the kelp industry, we've also convened a industry advisory group that's going to help this certifying work group figure out how to come up with guidelines and protocols that make sense for a kelp farm. Green Wave is also, you can see on this slide, they are, Sam Garwin, who is here somewhere, is very much, there she is. Sam is collaborating and on behalf of Green Wave to convene the industry advisory group. And we are in the early stages, but it is a process that we're very hopeful about and that we think shows a lot of promise for developing a very strong foundation for organic certification within the industry. And again, happy to talk about it more with anyone who's interested, and I'm sure Sam is as well. And the timeline on this one, and we're really just getting it kicked off, and it's going to extend for really about the next year. So look for updates in the future. Thank you.
Thanks. I bet not a few of you are asking to yourselves, why are we just talking about food when there's non-food uses for kelps and other products? And I just want to note that, you know, we're not working on those the non-food areas as well. It's just a little bit more concrete when you actually have products in the marketplace to talk about helping market them. So we need to develop more products and as an industry in the non-food sector, and then we can start figuring out, you know, how to study supporting those products with marketing efforts. Welcome ideas on, you know, how to do that. And part of continuing to talk about non-food uses, we've got a talk from Simona Agit, I don't know how to pronounce that, but with marine biologics, and she's talking about navigating the supply chain and challenges in the emerging macroalgae aquaculture industry in the United States. Thank you. This or that.
Here we go. Aloha, everybody. My name is Simona Ogite. I'm the research director at Marine Biologics, and I currently reside in Hawaii, so I'm excited to be doing my cold therapy here this week. But it's been a real pleasure to be here with everybody. I see the industry momentum, the development, the community support, and so just really excited to see where this is going. So at Marine Biologics, we're a startup and we're focused on supply chain challenges, but also finding markets for cultivated macroalgae. And so specifically, we're looking at biorefineries and how can we set these up so that we can find high-value products to go into high-value markets. And so I'm going to share some of the challenges and some of the solutions that we see in this industry. And right off the bat, I'm going to tell you the solutions that we see is more of an aggregated supply. So thinking about more of a network of farmers instead of being isolated. In addition, we're thinking about containerized biorefineries where we can send stabilized extracts to regional processing hubs. And finally, again, thinking about high-value specialty compounds that are refined for the industrial customer. All right, so I'm going to go into more detail on those. Oops, wrong way. There we go. All right, so network of suppliers for resiliency. So again, today in Europe and North America, we're seeing macroalgae cultivation done by small-scale farms in remote coastal areas for the most part. So again, this leads to somewhat scattered production, and this limits the industrial potential or growth of this market. So we also see that a lot of biomass sales are limited to niche markets. And while we see a lot of development in that, in terms of food and things like this, we also need to think about other high-value avenues for this. So again, the solutions that we propose is rethinking how we enter into the supply chain of being a larger supplier network. And this in turn can lead to a more resilient biomass supply that will basically smooth out any regional cultivation challenges and provide a more continuous flow of biomass and greater supply certainty, right? So we need some stability and certainty as we think about scaling up and providing a feedstock for industrial customers. The second point is establishing these biorefineries for market access. So again, a lack of a regional processing infrastructure restricts the market access. So at the same time, if we set up a centralized refinery, it's very capital intensive, and it's difficult to set up because, again, these farmers are maybe scattered all over, in different regions. And so expanding this infrastructure into remote regions can be expensive. So what we're thinking about is unbundling, or basically breaking up the system into smaller components to where processing stabilized extracts and the cascading compounds can be separated into smaller units. So we suggest setting up these containerized micro-refineries that are less capital intensive and require simpler equipment than like a big refinery. And so then these stabilized, obviously there's a lot to work out. I know a lot of folks are working on stabilizing product, which is super important. But then these stabilized extracts can then go to downstream processing hubs. And then finally, thinking about designing these compounds for high growth. So it's currently, again, in North America and Europe, it's pretty much impossible to compete with commodity markets that rely on, cheap labor and lax regulations. And at the same time, finding high-value innovations is very time-consuming. But in addition to that, we also see that there is a need in the industry to find cutting-edge innovations. So in places like pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, nutraceuticals, advanced biomaterials, they're really eager to find products from macroalgae. So how do we accelerate the identification of these products? And again, we suggest, IDing sources of high-value demand can really drive this industry forward and be a catalyst for high-value markets. And this takes time, but this is, there is market demand and there is premium prices for this. We also are looking at digital learning and potentially AI to map out chemical performance, so to map out basically platforms of chemicals. So again, if we're thinking about replacing petrochemicals, we want to screen for what's needed and how do the macroalgae potentially replace this industry with more greener chemicals that are found in the algae. And again, we think that if we identify, we screen these, then we can compete in terms of cost, availability, and formula integration and performance and drive the industry forward. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next presenter, I think we all in Alaska are lucky to have Bobby Hudson from Pacific Shellfish Institute and her home base in Olympia there, and the much larger oyster industry down Pacific Northwest. Bring a bunch of her research and experience into our state. We both have connections to the small town of Gustavus, and for that, we're lucky to have her up here. And she's going to talk about shellfish supply chains. Of course, we need to get these premium perishable products to market and maintain the quality along the way. So thank you.
Use this one. Thank you so much, Dan. That's so sweet. I am very happy to be here. So how about those oysters last night? I'm an oyster lover. I am absolutely an oyster lover. And I've been coming to ASCA and visiting farms for, 12 years. That's the first time that I've had so many different farmers' oysters in the same place at the same time in this state. Like, it's pretty usual down south. We'll have like shellfish events and of course oyster oyster bars with, multiple oysters on the same plate, but that doesn't really happen here very often. So that was really awesome. I get to travel a lot. I eat oysters all over the world, all around the country. My partner is also a shellfish farmer in BC. So yeah, I love oysters. But how do they get to consumers like me and consumers like all of you when we don't have them just provided by the farms like we did last night? So unfortunately, it's really hard for me to see that screen, so I can't walk you through that. But actually, that's going to be really challenging. You probably can't see it very well either. Basically, what that is a diagram of all the different connections of the supply chain, how oysters get to consumers. And the point being, I guess, overall, is it is fairly complex. There's lots of different ways that they do get to our consumers. So hopefully this next one's going to be easier to see. I can fake it. Thanks, Eric. You did a great job faking it yesterday. So, sorry, that wasn't meant to be a low jab. It really wasn't. So, yes, so here in Alaska, most folks probably haven't seen this yet, but this is some work that just came out by Dr. Carol Engel and a team of folks, some of which are in the room. This is their draft supply chain for Alaska oysters specifically. This was funded by the Western Regional Aquaculture Center, so they did one of these for all of the western states. But here in Alaska, it's actually pretty simple compared to some of the other states. So your different suppliers feed to the farms, and then there's this intermediate buyer in some case, and then direct sales. I think most of what I've seen up here are a lot of that direct sales, not nearly as much wholesaler or distributor that we have in other parts of the country. And then that gets to retail buyers. Some folks up here are selling into international markets, and then direct retail sales, and that's how it gets to the end consumer. So thankfully that one was a little bit easier for me to see. This one, not so much. So I've been working in this supply chain area for, 5 or 10 years. We've had funded research looking at shellfish supply chains. This work was looking at the Chesapeake, huge producer, and Washington State, huge producer. That's why I'm based in Washington State, Pacific Shellfish Institute, because Washington has been the leading producer of shellfish and specifically oysters for a really long time. But gosh, I'm trying to fake it, darn it. Hopefully you guys can see that. But so I guess the overarching point on this one is you've got your local distribution chain, which is shorter, and then your national distribution chain that is longer. And for international, of course, you're going to end up with that air freight at the end. So that work was done because we were interested in the supply chain and temperature abuse, unfortunately. So like Dan said, we're talking about fresh products that need to get to the end consumer as quickly and under temperature control. And so we looked at these shipments coming out of the Chesapeake and coming out of Washington because we were specifically interested in risk of parahemolyticus, Vibrio parahemolyticus, and that naturally occurs in the environment, but it increases with heat, basically. And so temperature abuse can be a huge problem. So what we found, and yeah, we published this, there's a number of papers about it in different journals, but the main finding is that air freight, which somebody said yesterday, James, I think, and Eric, that sitting on the tarmac, that is the weakest link. So you need to have a way to control your product. That is where we saw a lot of temperature abuse. It can happen in these trucks as it's being shipped, or train cars. Actually, it usually doesn't happen in train cars because people don't ship that way, but can happen in trucks. There's lots of ways to control for that, to put in, data loggers, temperature sensors to track your product through the system, and that's what we did for this research. But anyway, bottom line here being air freight was the riskiest because of lack of control, get it to the end destination, and they may not have adequate refrigeration. So closing this one out, that my short time here with you all this morning, we are just starting at Pacific Shellfish Institute. We're looking at oyster markets for NOAA fisheries. So we were just tasked with this for nationwide to gain a better understanding of what the potential of the markets are for oyster production in the U.S. There's concern that we've moved to such a dominant half-shell market. Are we going to reach market saturation? Like, every region has their own oysters that we love, but across the country, is there a point at which we might run into market saturation? Or are there other areas that we can explore of value-added products or different markets that U.S. oysters could get into? So that's the purpose of this work. I just wanted to inform you that we're doing that to inform NOAA fisheries, but also private businesses and public policy actions to sustain our oyster industry and to identify data gaps to build a structural supply and demand model for U.S. oyster market. So we're looking right now, starting this work, looking at current production and recent trends across the country. Again, different states have different data quality with regard to that. Characterize the market supply chains and the market channels, and then to identify potential for market growth. So with that, I think I will turn this over to the panel.
Well, we have a packed day, and we have used up our time for this panel. We don't have a lot of time for questions, but I think we can fit in one or two. And if anybody wants to get a mic, we welcome those questions especially. Thank you to everybody for participating. We are over time, so I think we should move on. Should take our break and move on. But the point, you know these people better now. Please continue these interactions and discussions and justifying, backing up all the claims we're making and our labels and improving our understanding of where the value we can create is. I think there's just a lot. It's important to remember those questions are not yet answered. A lot of interesting work to be done. So it's exciting, and I'm glad you also mentioned the need for other oyster markets, and we do want to support that as well with our Build Back Better grant. So, inviting you to the Symphony of Seafood. Go, yeah, please.
I just want to say it was a great panel, and I'd like to invite everybody to look at the Symphony of Seafood page on AFDF's website. It's a great place for adding new product and innovation. Jen was on there with her Foraged and Found products, so was Barnacle, and now we have an accelerator program that we've just added, which will help with business development. So it's great for around the plate, beyond the plate, and anything food or beyond. Plastics. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank our panel again, and we'll move to break.